Buenos días a todas. Muchísimas gracias a todo el mundo por, bueno, pues por estar ahí, por conseguir juntarse con nosotros y empezar a celebrar con nosotros este primer encuentro del 30 aniversario, ¿vale? Yo creo que es importante contaros por qué hemos elegido hablar hoy por la mañana a estas horas con Zoe. La doctora Zoe Jordan es directora ejecutiva del Instituto Joanna Briggs y, como sabéis, el Instituto Joanna Briggs está en Australia y le agradecemos a ella que esté ahora con nosotros, a pesar de que para ella ya hace tiempo que acabó su horario laboral, ¿vale? Como muchos sabéis, el Instituto Joanna Briggs, que tiene su sede en la Facultad de Ciencias Médicas de la Universidad de Adelaida, es un referente en práctica clínica basada en la evidencia en cuidados a nivel mundial y es un referente indiscutible. Lideran una red de más de 70 entidades colaboradoras en todo el mundo y todo el mundo y todas las entidades colaboradoras o bien se dedican a sintetizar y a transferir evidencia o bien a implantar la evidencia que se ha sintetizado. Pero bueno, cada uno tiene diferentes roles, pero la actividad se realiza a lo largo de todo el mundo. La presencia de Zoe hoy con nosotros tiene un significado especial y dos razones así emotivas. Una es una colaboración compartida. Compartimos el mismo hito. Ellos también celebran este año su 30 aniversario, 3 décadas de compromiso en cuidados excelentes. Y por otro lado, para nosotras, como Centro Español para los Cuidados de Salud basados en la evidencia, que es un centro colaborador de JBI, Zoe es nuestra líder académica, es nuestra líder científica y una persona que nos acompaña a lo largo de todas las actividades que nosotros estamos haciendo en práctica clínica basada en la evidencia en nuestro país. Y yo, sin más preámbulo, os dejo con ella para que nos cuente su institución y cómo es la colaboración entre nosotros y cómo entre todos a nivel mundial estamos consiguiendo que los cuidados que estamos dando a la población a la que asistimos y en la que vivimos sean cuidados excelentes. I giving you the floor, Zoe.
Thank you so much, matey. I'm just going to share my screen. Is that working?
Yes, it's working.
Yes, okay. What a kind introduction. I am so honoured to have been asked to present to you today. I wish I could
Sorry,
be.
Zoe. Sorry, I forget to tell the people because I don't see the people. Sorry. You have, tenéis abajo, en la barra de abajo, tenéis una bola, como un icono de bola del mundo que pone interpretación y podéis elegir que escuchéis el original, que será en inglés y en español, depende de la persona que hable. En inglés, si alguien quiere escucharlo en inglés para todo el momento, o tenéis también la opción de escucharlo todo el rato en español. ¿Vale? Perdonad que no os lo he dicho antes, pero que sepáis eso, que si dais a la bola del mundo podéis escucharlo en español. Y cuando Zoe acabe, os podremos, si alguien quiere hablar o quiere preguntar, os abriremos los micrófonos para que podáis hacerlo. Muchas gracias. Sorry, Zoe. It's already explained that I have forgotten to explain how it goes. Sorry.
That's okay. That's totally fine. And I'm very grateful because you can see from my title that my Spanish is terrible. As I said, I'm just delighted to have been asked to speak with you today. JBI, as Matey has already indicated, also celebrates our 30th anniversary this year. So today is not only a celebration of your institute, but of the relationships that you have built over many years. And that includes the partnership with JBI, which has grown, evolved, and strengthened since 2004. It is a partnership built on shared values, shared purpose, and a deep belief in the power of evidence to improve the lives of patients. As with all presentations, I make the following disclosures, but I don't believe any of them represent a conflict of interest. So today I'd like to introduce you to JBI. I'm not sure how much you know about our organisation, and then I'll talk a little bit about our partnership with Spain and your entity, and perhaps look ahead to the future. So to start by introducing JBI, we are a global evidence-based healthcare research organisation at what is now known as Adelaide University, following the recent merger between the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia. We continue to be ranked in the global top 100 with a combined 180 years of collective experience across those two organisations, making it the perfect home for JBI and our programs. JBI was founded in 1996 by Professor Alan Pearson to provide better evidence to inform clinical decision-making and improve health outcomes globally. Today, we remain mission and vision focused, and we are committed to promoting and supporting evidence-based healthcare across the globe. So a quick snapshot. For those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar with JBI, as I said, we are a global organisation committed to improving health and health service delivery through evidence-based decision-making. We provide practical tools to find, assess, and use the best available evidence. But of course, we don't do this alone. Through the JBI Global Collaboration, we work with universities, hospitals, NGOs, and research centres worldwide, ensuring that the evidence we generate and implement is culturally appropriate and inclusive and relevant across the diversity of healthcare internationally. This is our JBI model of evidence-based healthcare. At the centre of the model, you will see what we refer to as our pebble of knowledge, the same as you would see in our logo. And it represents our FAME approach, because we feel very strongly in JBI that we look at not only effectiveness, as many other evidence-based healthcare organisations do, but also the feasibility and appropriateness and meaningfulness of the care that is provided. So this central process is informed by 4 key elements: the best available evidence, of course, the context in which care is provided, the values and preferences of patients and communities, and the expertise of health professionals. The inner wedges that you can see there illustrate the conceptual steps that move us towards evidence-based healthcare, and the outer wedges show how these steps are operationalised and reflect the functional teams and divisions that drive the work in JBI. Now, I think this model was first conceptualised in 2005. We reviewed it in 2015, and this year we intend to review it again, because obviously this is a space that is changing all the time. Now, this is a visual that we have developed more recently, because as an international research organisation, JBI adopts a hybrid integrated approach to research and development that includes really strong industry partnerships that drive the conduct of conceptual, methodological, and applied research and innovation to drive impact in health policy and practice. And we're quite unique in the sense that certainly in our university, we are the only fully commercialised research unit. But you can see from this graphic how our research relies on close relationships with industry, and that includes nurses and allied health professionals working at the coalface because they're a critical conduit to clinical practice and making sure that our outputs are appropriate and relevant. Over many, many years, well, over 30 years, we've developed a unique suite of resources, including evidence-based information, software, education and training to improve healthcare practice and health outcomes. And those continue to evolve every year. It's very exciting work to be a part of. Ultimately, JBI's research and development programs, products, services, and outputs are focused on getting the appropriate information into the hands of decision makers and those who deliver care. The thing that I think really captured my imagination when I started working in JBI 26 years ago was the idea that we had a really practical role to play in this space. So it's not just about doing the academic work of evidence synthesis and publishing systematic reviews, but we really focus, unlike any other organisation in this ecosystem, really, on supporting the use of that evidence at the point of care. And that's something that really inspired and excited me when I started here all those years ago. Now, going back to the model, central to JBI's approach to evidence-based healthcare is the understanding that the success of this global agenda depends on individuals and organisations working together within a functioning evidence ecosystem, as well as understanding that the challenges in promoting and supporting this endeavour are diverse, complex, and vary between countries and cultures, and they often require strategies that are specific to a local context. And so this is where collaborative evidence networks come in. Global collaborative evidence networks bring together diverse actors from within and across evidence ecosystems to share information, expertise, and build capacity for knowledge generation, transfer, and use. These networks, like those that you can see on the screen, JBI, of course, Campbell, Cochrane, the Africa Evidence Network, and many others, were established with a common goal, and that is to work together to produce, synthesize, and disseminate evidence to improve practice and indeed lives. The last 30 years have seen each of these networks make a profound impact on the evidence-based agenda. And I'm really proud to say that now more than ever, our networks are working more closely together. We used to be very siloed, and now we're really connected and trying to coordinate our efforts, which is really exciting for us. The JBI collaboration is really the engine that drives JBI's worldwide effort to promote and support evidence, to inform decisions made at the point of care. And we are almost at 100 entities, which is a phenomenal increase. When I first started, I think we had about 6 staff in Adelaide, and I think the same number of collaborating entities across Australia. And back then, I think we had 1 in Hong Kong and 1 in New Zealand. So the growth has been really overwhelming, and seeing groups around the world engage with our work has been very humbling. And we could not do it without them. So really, it's one of the largest global networks to integrate evidence-based healthcare with a theory-informed model that brings together academic entities with hospitals and health systems. JBI collaborating entities are self-governing and are initiated and coordinated through JBI. They're driven by a united desire to contribute to improvements in quality and outcomes of healthcare globally through the delivery of high-quality programs of evidence synthesis, transfer, and implementation. The functions of the JBIC are directed towards the knowledge needs of local clinicians and consumers, with each entity leading evidence-based initiatives in their region, country, state, or specialty. As a global collaborative evidence network, the value of the JBIC comes from the skills, the knowledge, and professional connections we share with others. Benefits include access to evidence-based information, software, resources, training, mentorship, meetings and events where colleagues can share ideas and build collective wisdom. And JBI recognises that health professionals are central to implementation activities and have often not had formal opportunities for training in processes for implementation. And to that end, JBI and the JBIC co-created the Clinical Partnership Engagement Program, where the knowledge needs of the healthcare community are paired with the skills of experienced academics to address translational gaps and promote an evidence-based approach to healthcare delivery that is really context-centric. There have been projects working with governments and policymakers at state, national, and regional levels, as well as with international bodies like the World Health Organization, to support practice change. Other regional initiatives have focused on bringing health professionals together to reduce translational gaps in evidence-based healthcare, and this includes conferences and events that have brought together thought leaders from across countries and across regions. At a high level, the JBIC and also all of those entities play a vital role within the global evidence ecosystem to advance knowledge, that is, the science of evidence synthesis, transfer, and implementation, but also to build capacity for researchers, students, clinicians, and decision makers in evidence-based healthcare. They inform decision-making and contribute to policy and practice change that has real impact on healthcare, health systems, and health outcomes, much of which is achieved through strong and equitable partnerships at the local, national, and regional levels. Every JBIC entity has a story of impact or a story of change, whether their activity, project, or intervention has contributed to changes in health policy, guidelines, clinical practice, or health outcomes in their local setting. We have a section of our website, I don't know if this is going to work, no, where you can read more than 30 impact stories from across our network. Oh, there it goes. So now to our partnership with Spain. In about 2003, Professor Alan Pearson embarked on an international lecture series which inspired the establishment of several new JBI entities, including Spain. And I think, if I read correctly, perhaps Matey also attended an event, you can correct me at the end, Matey, in Melbourne, which also really inspired you to start this entity. I trawled through so many files to try and find some records. We weren't very good at record keeping, but I did come across this bulletin in hard copy, very old-fashioned, that we used to publish. And you can see here that there is a quote from Matey stating that their immediate aim was to help the development, promotion, and support of an evidence-based approach to healthcare. But I just want to pause for a moment to acknowledge and congratulate two very important people who I know are both online with us today, because they are two individuals that I hold in such high esteem who have built something truly special in Spain. Both of you established an entity that has become part of the very fibre of JBI and our global collaborative network. Not just contributing to what we do, but contributing to our culture, innovating and leading. And this anniversary really is a testimony to your sustained commitment and excellence in evidence-based nursing, not just in Spain, but globally. So as I said, our records in JBI have not always been particularly good until more recent years. And so I wasn't able to confirm all of the specific numbers related to your entity's outputs. But these dot points give you some kind of idea of the activity of the entity. You can see that they've been involved in methodological development. They've trained hundreds of individuals in JBI methodologies. It says here that you've published over 30 reports, but I expect it is far, far more than that, particularly when you start thinking about journals outside of the two JBI journals. You translated over 2,000 resources in our database and worked with and supported clinical partners across 17 regions in Spain, and also delivered some very successful events. And I couldn't do this presentation without at least having one trip down memory lane. And I remember this event. I think my role back then was as the director of global relations or communications or something. And so I was really heavily invested in helping to plan this colloquium in 2008. And I was completely devastated when Professor Pearson told me that I had to stay at home and look after the team in Adelaide. And so I didn't get to go, and I was so angry with him for a very long time because I missed out. And I know that my colleagues who attended had the most rewarding, wonderful experience with all of you in Spain. I mentioned just before that the entity in Spain had translated more than 2,000 pieces of content. And in fact, the Spanish entity was one of the first to participate in linguistic translation. Unfortunately, it wasn't a sustainable model, and so we weren't able to remunerate the centre to the extent that we should have been able to, because it's such an enormous undertaking to do this work. And we learned a lot along the way, which was wonderful. But we're still exploring ways to achieve that. Now, with the advent of AI, certainly there's opportunity for translating into other languages, but the contextualization of that information, we believe, is just as important. And I don't think we're quite there yet. So it's still something that we need to resolve, but absolutely the entity in Spain was a pioneer in that space back when you were doing that work. And so Matey did ask me to look to the future a little bit. And as I was thinking about this, I think there is an uncomfortable truth for all of us working in evidence-based healthcare. We do not have an evidence problem, in my view. We have an implementation problem. Last year and the year before, I was involved in helping to run the evidence synthesis infrastructure collaborative planning process, which is a fabulous initiative seeking to align the conduct of reviews with the demand, and to reduce duplication of effort and research waste. So it's a really valuable initiative, and I stand behind it 100%. But while that is positive, it does not address the pervasive issues associated with getting evidence into practice. And our network of entities, and Spain has certainly been a key player in this space, around supporting clinicians at the point of care. It is such a human-centric activity, and I don't think it really matters what groups like Cochrane and JBI do. in the synthesis space, we really need to have groups on the ground who are nurturing and supporting clinicians to evaluate their practice against the best available evidence and to work towards practice change. And that is a very big challenge that I think we are still far from overcoming. And so we really, are already in a position where we're looking at how we can supply evidence faster, which is great. We've come together for, more than 20 years with a shared purpose, and looking to the future, I think that a much stronger focus on context-driven implementation is where we need to put our attention, empowering nurses. And for JBI, that's also allied health professionals as evidence leaders. As I said, Spain has been leading in this space for 30 years, which is an extraordinary effort. And believe me, as someone who has also been doing this for almost 30 years, it's a huge challenge to stay motivated and continue to evolve and innovate and stay motivated to make a difference and to believe that you're doing work that makes a difference. So for those of us, Matey, Esther, others who have been around for a while, I think our task is to inspire the next generation who will pick up the mantle and take forward the work that we have been doing. I suppose a final reflection would be that for 20 years we have worked together to produce evidence, to teach evidence, and to advocate for evidence. But the true measure of our success is not just in the reviews that we have collectively published or the courses that we deliver. It is how quickly a patient somewhere in Spain, somewhere in the world, receives better care because a nurse was able to act on trustworthy evidence. And I suppose that is the thing that keeps me motivated and keeps me wanting to be engaged in this work after such a long time. I think it was Shakespeare in The Twelfth Night who wrote, "I can no other answer make, but thanks and thanks and ever thanks." Because words simply seem insufficient to express my gratitude to you and your team. Muchas gracias, my terrible Spanish, but thank you for more than 20 years of collaboration and leadership, and also friendship. I feel really privileged to have been a part of this journey with you and your team. And here's to hopefully many, many more. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Zoe. Mis aplausos, porque es difícil escuchar los aplausos del resto de la gente. Hemos llegado a más de, bueno, de 100 participantes, con lo cual era algo que yo creo que tenía interés para las personas. Para España, el instituto, bueno, la colaboración con el Instituto Joanna Briggs ha sido fundamental para lanzar otros proyectos de evidencia, de implantación de evidencia y de uso de esa evidencia, que yo creo que ha llegado y llegó con Joanna Briggs en 2004, pero después de tantos años ha llegado para quedarse. Creo que siendo honradas, sin esta colaboración que iniciamos con Alan, pues no hubiera sido lo mismo. Yo creo que Alan tenía era un visionario y tenía mucho énfasis, ¿no? Y nosotros teníamos ganas de hacer y se juntaron las ganas de hacer de Alan con las ganas de hacer nuestras. pero yo no quiero dejar ni un minuto, luego abrimos las preguntas, pero creo que lo más importante para mí, como responsable bueno, del Centro Colaborador en España, son dos cosas. Uno es el magnífico y todo mi entusiasmo es pensar que alguien puede estar gestionando más de 90 centros colaboradores a lo largo del mundo. Para mí eso es algo que, si a veces me cuesta gestionar lo que tengo en casa, cuando veo y nos juntamos tanta gente tan diferentes, con tantas culturas y formas de hacer diferentes, yo creo que eso es quizá para mí el mayor éxito y la mayor admiración hacia alguien que se atreve a gestionar semejante mundo, porque es un mundo entero. Y luego por parte de España, yo creo que, bueno, agradecer a mucha gente que ha estado motivando al resto de profesionales para el uso de la evidencia, pero yo sí que quiero agradecer y aprovechar para agradecer a todos los profesionales que están a pie de cama, que están cuidando la población y que están cuidando a los pacientes y a las personas, porque sin su compromiso, sin su liderazgo y su bien hacer, nosotras podríamos estar generando evidencia, teoría, pero no creo que fuéramos capaces de que la población se beneficiase de lo que nosotros estamos haciendo. Entonces yo para todos esos líderes que están, la gata también quiere liderar ahora, para todos esos líderes que están en la práctica clínica y que día a día hacen lo mejor que pueden para prestar cuidados de excelencia, todo mi agradecimiento y decirles eso, que sin ellos seguiríamos generando evidencia, generando teorías, métodos, pero no seríamos capaces de poder hacer otra cosa que eso. Me ha salido un doble, que no sé quién es, pero me parece bien que tenía un doble. Y sin más, podéis, si alguien quiere hablar, puede levantar la mano y podemos iros dando paso a las personas que queráis levantar la mano y queráis hacer alguna pregunta. Mientras tanto, le dejo a Esther también que pueda hacer alguna reflexión o alguna pregunta al respecto. Esther, todo tuyo.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, Zoe. Ha sido una síntesis fantástica de lo que ha sido la evolución conjunta de GBI con nosotros a lo largo de todos estos años, desde el principio. Y yo creo que has puesto el foco en los elementos clave. Obviamente, mi reflexión es que, además de lo que ha dicho Maite, yo creo que GBI y la colaboración internacional GBI quizás es la única o la que mejor ha sabido aceptar el reto de esa brecha que existe entre la teoría y la práctica, entre la investigación y la práctica. Y a lo largo de todos estos años se ha dotado de herramientas para ser capaz de salvar esa brecha. Para mí ese es quizá lo que me quedo como el mejor resultado, porque esto es a nivel internacional. Los centros crecen, 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 cada vez hay más centros en la colaboración y creo que realmente el impacto está siendo enorme y está siendo enorme a nivel de la práctica. Yo quería preguntarte, aunque has avanzado algunas cosas, quería preguntarte, mientras se animan los asistentes a levantar la mano o a incluir preguntas en la sección de preguntas y respuestas, ¿cuál te parece a ti que es el principal reto que tenemos en la colaboración GBI para los próximos años? Yo creo que la estructura, las líneas estratégicas, el modelo GBI se han mostrado muy potentes, pero si puedes profundizar un poco en cuáles te parece a ti que son los retos y en qué podemos contribuir.
It's a good question, Esther. As far as the JBIC is concerned, I think we have grown faster and bigger than we ever anticipated. And I am still in contact with Alan Pearson. We catch up regularly. And I think it has surpassed even what he imagined. And so for us, as Métis intimated, managing a large group of entities like that over different cultures and contexts, and making sure that we are respectful and equitable in our approach is something that is has always been a passion of mine. I'm always a bit hesitant to say this, but I was not a nurse or a health professional. And so my drive and my passion has always been our global family. And I feel Bianca, who is our director of global relations now, will tell people she had to pry that from my hands because I felt so strongly about the people. And I often will say I spent some time in New Zealand on secondment in 2007, and I'm sure both of you have heard me reference the Maori saying, "It is the people, it is the people, it is the people." And without those people, we are nothing. And as Métis said, without, clinicians at the point of care, we are nothing. And so, I feel very strongly that everything that we do is grounded in who it is we are looking to serve. And I get very troubled when I see that the science is moving very rapidly, and it's very impressive if you look at the work of other groups in the ecosystem. They're very smart people, much smarter than I am. But my fear is that they look at the evidence and critique the evidence to such a level that they render it all useless. And at the end of the day, the people that JBI want to help and support are nurses working at the bedside. And we cannot go back to those stakeholders and tell them that all of the research is useless. We have to support them to make good decisions. And I see this in the ecosystem and attend a lot of conferences and hear people talking about, this very sophisticated science, which I absolutely respect, believe me. But my fear is that we lose sight of pragmatism. And that is something that Alan was always very passionate about, and something that I would hate to see JBI or the JBIC ever lose sight of. And I think the fact that we do focus on implementation helps to keep us grounded. And I hope that we all continue to sing from the same hymn book, and that as we grow and as new entities come on board, we absolutely, continue to work on the science of what we do, but we keep clinicians in our line of sight, because that's who we were set up for. That's our vision and mission all comes back to supporting clinicians. Does that answer you?
Yeah, thank you.
Le voy a dar la mano, ha levantado la mano Eva, mira, tienes el micrófono cerrado, pero podrías abrir el micrófono y hablar. ¿Puedes hablar, Eva?
There are some people from assistant that have the
Mientras
hand
tanto,
up.
también se lo doy a Lucrecia Eva,
Ah,
perfecto. Y Lucrecia luego, ¿vale?
buenos días, Maite. Buenos días, Esther. Good morning, Zoe. I want to thank you for being here today, first of all. It's a pleasure to having you here. As a healthcare provider, our first priority is to offer the best of us. And I think that here in Spain, getting evidence into practice, as you said before, is the more difficult part of all that, because time is precious and our health centers are more and more crowded day by day. So for me, it's a real problem to implementate all those knowledge in the practice. And I want to know how face this problem, if you can give us a solution.
That is the million-dollar question, Eva.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm so I'm sorry, I don't think I have a magic bullet or a good solution other than to say that having entities like the JBI entity in Spain set up to support clinicians is critical to our vision and mission. And I think that, Métis and Esther and the team do a lot of work to provide education and training and access to tools and resources to support clinicians. But it is the question that I get asked more than any other by nurses. And we ran last year our solution room, our local solution room in Adelaide. And I remember talking to a very young nurse who had not been working clinically for very long. She was a relatively new graduate. And she said to me, and it's just stayed with me, she said, I am so concerned with making it through a shift and not killing a patient that I don't have time to think about assessing what I'm doing against the evidence. She said it just feels too hard. And so I don't know. We talk to clinicians all the time to ask them what can we do that would help. We are certainly looking in this age of AI, we are looking at different ways of embedding the best available research at the point of care. And there are different mechanisms that we can that we're looking at to try and make that easier, because I think access is a huge barrier. We certainly have found that not just in Adelaide, but we've had feedback from across the world that finding the best available evidence and having access to that at the point of care is a huge barrier. So I'm sorry that I don't have a good answer for that, but I promise that it is, front of mind for us every day, and any ideas that anybody has, we're always open to. But I think a critical part of that problem is having people on the ground locally to support nurses, which is why our global network is so, so, so important to us.
Thank you for your answer. Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
Just for us to implement those knowledge, there is any resources or database we can use daily?
Yes.
Daily.
Yes. So JBI, I wasn't sure about the audience and what level of information to provide, but we do have a suite of resources. We have 2 academic journals, but we also have a point of care database that has been designed by nurses for nurses, with evidence-based procedures and audit criteria. and we have two pieces of software, one of which is specifically to support implementation at the point of care. So I think Matey and Esther would be able to tell you more about it in Spanish. I want to say to other people on the call, if you wish to speak in Spanish, please do, because we do have dual. Thank you, Eva, for speaking in English, but we have dual translation. So if you want to speak in Spanish, that's fine too.
Gracias, Zoe. Está Lucrecia, que tenía también la mano levantada. Y mientras Lucrecia abre el micro, ya los he abierto. Luego hay tres preguntas en el
Sí,
Lucrecia.
buenos días. Primero de todo, muchas gracias porque me ha parecido muy interesante todo lo que habéis comentado. Y bueno, es que justamente mi pregunta era muy similar a la que ha hecho Eva, entonces ya está contestada, me parece.
Vale, pues muchas gracias, Lucrecia.
Gracias.
Si quieres, Maite, voy dando paso a las preguntas del chat.
Si las vas leyendo, sí,
Vale.
estaría bien.
Zoe, te traslado preguntas que han dejado escritas. Una quizá esté ya un poco respondida, de Vanessa. Dice, recogiendo el foco puesto en GBI Implementation, ¿qué estrategias concretas se están aplicando en el punto de atención para acercar la evidencia a los profesionales? En un contexto donde los profesionales a pie de cama no tienen tiempo protegido entendemos dentro del horario laboral, para consumir evidencia.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And like I said, I think we have resource that has been designed for use at the point of care. So unlike other organisations who work in the evidence ecosystem and produce lengthy systematic reviews, something that we're very proud of in JBI is that we do produce systematic reviews, but we also produce much shorter documents that are more like evidence summaries and best practice information sheets that are meant to be really accessible from a content perspective. From a technology perspective, I think we're still lagging behind. So I think we still haven't quite got to the point where what we would love is an app or something that is really accessible right where you're making the decision. And we haven't managed to get there yet, but it's something that is that is right at the top of our to-do list. So while the information has been designed with accessibility in mind, I'm very conscious that from a technology perspective, we're not there yet. We did a lot of work last year with a tech company looking at how we could build technical infrastructure so that the content that we have fed straight into clinical information systems. But what we were told was that in a lot of hospitals, the infrastructure isn't there to support it. So we're looking at different options that can be used across different contexts, because we're also mindful of groups like our partners in Africa, for example, or in low and middle income countries that simply don't have access to the technological infrastructure. And so trying to make sure that we have resources available in lots of different ways to account for lots of different contexts, I think is really important. So yeah, again, as I said earlier, I think we're always trying to innovate and evolve our content and tools, and that's something that we've been endlessly frustrated by. We just haven't been able to solve that yet, but we're working on it.
Gracias, Zoe. Te leo la siguiente pregunta que hace Chelo Company. Dice, felicidades por la exposición y la colaboración durante todos estos años. Quería preguntar desde su experiencia internacional qué estrategias considera más efectivas para implicar a responsables políticos y decisores en la implementación de la evidencia en los centros sanitarios. especialmente en contextos donde existe dificultad para conectar el ámbito técnico con el ámbito político.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's an interesting question because the work that I was involved with through the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative was very much focused on policymakers and government sectors globally. And it's a very different space for JBI because we have historically been very clinically focused. So I probably don't have a perfect answer for this question either, really, because it's just not been the focus of our attention. But there are initiatives who are focusing on engaging with policymakers. We did do a piece of work just here in Australia as a pilot that came out of the work of the Global Commission on evidence, where we mapped the evidence ecosystem. And I think that, you know, similar work has been done in other countries. I don't know if anybody has done that piece of work for Spain, but the important thing about that work was that, and what we learned is that we thought we had a very good handle on who all of the important players were in Australia. We thought we knew all of the groups that were doing synthesis work, the groups that were focused on implementation. And when we actually mapped it, there were hundreds that we simply didn't even know existed. And so we know that policymakers, particularly those working in government, will reach out to a group and ask for a piece of synthesis work to be done, or ask for a piece of implementation work to be done, not understanding that that work has already been done elsewhere. And so this idea of duplication of effort is true across every country that, you know, I've interacted with. And so there are, you know, the ESIC initiative was all about trying to connect supply and demand in the policy sector. Now, I actually think that in JBI, we do that quite well with clinical practice. Most of our entities work with clinical partners to determine what their knowledge needs are. And that has been part of our modus operandi for 30 years. And Alan was very passionate about that at the start, that we should not be doing evidence synthesis work unless it responds directly to the needs of clinicians working at the point of care. And so I think having open dialogue is really important with key stakeholders, but that's hard to achieve if you don't know who they are. And we've seen it time and time again, is that you might have individuals who have relationships with particular people, but when they leave, when they move on, the dialogue falls down and then you start from scratch. And so, you know, a bit like implementation work, it's very human-centric and relationship-centric. And I think that, you know, there's no clean and clear way of, you know, there's no recipe for making that work. So much of it is about relationship building and connecting, you know, connecting on the supply and demand side. Now, whether that's policy or whether it's clinical practice, I think it's just really important that that those relationships are, it's work as well. It's not something that just happens naturally. It's something that has to be invested in. And so I'm very conscious of that. And we talk about that with our entities as well, that they should be connected to end users, because otherwise, again, why are we here?
Gracias, Zoe. Hay otra pregunta que nos hace Félix Morales. Hemos hablado de los clínicos, de los pacientes a nivel político, y Félix toca la tercera pata, el tercer pilar. Dice, teniendo en cuenta el modelo de GBI, ¿Qué estrategias metodológicas se recomiendan para integrar de manera efectiva la evidencia cualitativa en las guías de buenas prácticas? Me interesa especialmente cómo asegurar que la voz del paciente sea vinculante en la recomendación final y no quede solo como un complemento secundario a la efectividad clínica.
Oh, Felix, you are my person. So one of the points of difference for JBI since inception has been that we have a much more inclusive view on what constitutes evidence to inform decision making. And we would never, ever say that qualitative evidence is complementary to or second rate to quantitative. They answer different questions, and they are both absolutely valuable. Now, I also am a qualitative researcher, but I also sit on the textual evidence synthesis methodology group for JBI, because equally, you cannot say to a clinician, there's no research that addresses your question, and so we can't tell you anything. They still have to make a decision, and often there is non-research evidence available that in the form of expert opinion, whether the expert is a clinician or a consumer or whichever language you choose to describe those different groups. But there is usually some kind of evidence available, and it is absolutely our responsibility to make sure that we don't just look at the best available evidence as it relates to effectiveness. Effectiveness is a different question to experiential evidence that helps us to understand how a patient feels about a particular intervention. I often, when I used to talk to people about different kinds of evidence, I would use the example of pressure stockings to prevent deep vein thrombosis, and it's a perfect example of the TED stockings being the evidence demonstrates that they are the most effective intervention for reducing deep vein thrombosis. But particularly in countries like Australia and probably Spain, where it gets very, very hot, patients find them very uncomfortable to wear. And so if they don't wear them, it doesn't matter how effective they are. So, equally, I guess, another example might be the very expensive mattresses that they use in hospitals in some countries to prevent pressure ulcers developing in hospitals. And absolutely, those very expensive mattresses have been shown to be one of the most effective strategies. But that doesn't matter if you are working in a community in Kenya, in a remote area, and you don't have money or access to be able to purchase a mattress like that. So, all of these different kinds of evidence are really, really important for making a decision. Whether you're talking about clinical practice or whether you're talking about any decision that you make in your life, whether you're buying a car, you have to know that the car works well, but you also, probably, if you're like me, you look at the color and you decide whether or not you like the look of the model. So there's always lots of different evidence that we take into account when making any decision in our lives. So I feel like there are other organisations who are starting to catch up to JBI. I know that there are other groups that are now looking at synthesising qualitative evidence and other forms of evidence. But I really feel like JBI was a leader in that space. And it is so, so, so important that we are providing a full picture when we are giving clinicians data, information to inform their decision making. Couldn't agree with you more. You touched on something that I feel very passionate about.
Se ve. Bien, tenemos otra pregunta de Cristina Bosch. Dice, gracias por su exposición. Desde el ámbito académico o universitario, ¿cómo podemos hacer frente a la distancia entre la teoría explicada y que basamos en la evidencia y lo que después los estudiantes aprenden en el entorno de las prácticas clínicas, que no siempre coincide?
Goodness, you have wonderful people online tonight. This morning,
Yeah.
it's the morning for you. What fabulous questions. And they are all things that I just feel like are so important. So probably 15 years ago, Alan Pearson and I had this very conversation, and we talked about how could we develop a nested suite of courses for university undergraduates right through to postgraduate that help teach them the practical skills of thinking about research for decision making rather than thinking about research for the sake of doing research. So a lot of, certainly in Australia, a lot of universities still teach research to students to teach them how to do research, not to teach them the skills of critical appraisal and understanding research in order to inform their decisions. Unfortunately, there hasn't been great appetite for having foundational courses in our university, which I feel very, very strongly about. I think all students from undergrad right through should be taught the skills of, might not be doing a full systematic review, but how do you engage with research evidence and use it as a consumer to inform decision making. And I think that can be done in a range of different ways. And I would love to see a university, I wish it was Adelaide University, implement some common foundational courses to help clinicians think about these things for when they're in practice. I know there have been some efforts in our university before we merged to think about teaching across, across allied health medicine and nursing, because all of these students, irrespective of discipline, need those skills. Unfortunately, as I said, we had a lot of pushback, but I think there is room for the university system to evolve to better support clinicians to do this work once they leave university. I get very frustrated when I see courses that are designed to teach students research skills for the sake of doing research, because so few of them will actually go on to have a research career. We want them to go on to be working in hospitals and clinical settings. We want them to have the right set of skills to be able to engage with research, not necessarily to do research. So yeah, I will keep waving that flag. And it would be lovely to see another university pick that up too.
Gracias, Zoe. Bueno, nos quedan un poquito menos de 10 minutos. Entonces, si alguien se anima a hacer una nueva pregunta, o bien levantando la mano, o bien, si no queréis hablar y preferís hacerlo en preguntas y respuestas, estáis a tiempo, quizás haya tiempo para añadir una pregunta más. Mientras yo leo una que está en la sección de preguntas y respuestas. Dice, Investen participa en una red de investigación específica de cronicidad, atención primaria, promoción y prevención de la salud. Es una red enfocada a los resultados en salud. Uno de los objetivos pone el énfasis en buscar evidencia que promueva las preferencias de las personas, la perspectiva de género, las necesidades de las poblaciones vulnerables y la intersectorialidad en atención primaria. ¿Cómo se pueden combinar todos estos principios transversales en la búsqueda de la evidencia? Una pregunta ya de detalle.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. you ask hard questions. When I first started in JBI, I was given the task of managing what was then called our Consumer Information Program, which was meant to be a service where we rewrote our content for patients and their families. And I was very, very young and naive and thought that that was going to be easy, and learned very, very quickly that it is not at all easy. And I know that interest holder, I think that's what people call it now, interest holder engagement is incredibly difficult. And what we appreciated was that we could not do that for the world in JBI in Adelaide. And so while we encourage all of our entities to engage with end users, whether they are clinicians, whether they are patients, whether they are policymakers, whoever they are, and I think we had for some time we had some principles, but there are a lot of groups who are looking at this now, globally, like the Muse, I think they're still called the Muse Consortia out of Canada. Cochrane have a very strong consumer program and a co-production methodology group that I've been a part of over the years. And again, I think there's no silver bullet. There's no way of doing it that will work across all contexts. It has to be driven at a very local level. And so building networks of people that you can draw on to inform that piece of work, I think, is incredibly important. And it got to the point where it was out of scope for JBI to be doing that centrally, but we certainly encourage all of our entities to do that. I don't know if that answers that question properly.
Creo que sí, que está contestada. Maite, no sé si da tiempo, hay una última pregunta, pero también es una pregunta de detalle. No sé si tenemos que cerrar ya la sesión.
Sí, yo creo que hay tiempo para esta última y luego ya cerramos.
Vale, pues una última pregunta que hace Cristina Sánchez. Dice, respecto a la resistencia al cambio en equipos multidisciplinares, ¿qué estrategias han demostrado ser más efectivas para vencerlas?
So my academic background is in communication science. And all I would say to you is that you can never do it too much. And I'm also a huge believer in empathy as a strategy, because often, as you say, clinicians are very busy. They have a lot of people pulling at them from different directions. And so, when we talk about implementation in JBI, we are very conscious of the need to, listen first. And I think when you can understand the challenges that a clinician is experiencing, only then can you start to co-create solutions. And I think if we go in with a mindset that we have the evidence and you need to change, that inevitably fails. But in order to create opportunities for sustained, successful change programs, it is very much about listening first. So identifying with stakeholders, with interest holders, what their needs are, but then listening to the challenges that they are experiencing so that you can work together. It's a team sport, right? Implementation is not something that you can do for somebody or to somebody. It's something that you need to do collaboratively together.
Bien, pues con esto por mi parte ya no hay más preguntas. Muchísimas gracias por haber estado fuera de tu horario laboral completamente con nosotras. Ha sido un absoluto placer. Nos veremos en septiembre en Adelaida o alguien de España estará en Adelaida y le dejo la palabra a Maite. Muchísimas gracias, Zoe.
Nada, agradecerte, Zoe, o sea, que compartas tu conocimiento, que tengas esa sensación y esa necesidad y ese placer de compartir tu conocimiento y que te parezca que todo es compartible y que todo es así, que todo, o sea, que está bien y que todo el mundo tiene un interés, no sé, es una forma muy positiva de compartir el conocimiento. Eh, yo no digo que vamos a compartir otros 30 años, conmigo no cuentes otros 30 años, con Esther tampoco, y no sé si tú estás dispuesta a echar otros 30 años, pero yo creo que eso, que hubiera más de 100 personas conectadas y las preguntas que se han hecho durante esta hora, pues dan muestra de que hay interés y que afortunadamente hay gente que por detrás de nosotros va a empujar y va a impulsar y que un movimiento de mejor cuidados y de los mejores cuidados basados en la mejor ciencia posible está ya dentro de los genes de las nuevas generaciones y afortunadamente seguirán adelante. Así que nada, muchísimas gracias y no sé, descansa
Que
y,
descanses.
y disfruta de tu familia que estará deseando verte.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias,
Muchas
Zoe.
gracias. Gracias,
Thank
Zoe.
you. Thank
Bye. Gracias a todos por estar.